The final speaker for this panel this morning is Professor Audrey Yue, who is currently Associate Professor of Cultural Studies at the University of Melbourne.
What I want to do is to continue the conversation set up by Professor Lilly Kong this morning, but I want to stay in the debate around creative industries, and I want to, from there, carve out what I hope can be an alternative critical framework on cultural sustainability. And I also want to try and find a way to keep the economic and the social together. So what I want to do today is really to talk about sustainability. The question of sustainability has always preoccupied Singapore from its post-colonial beginnings to recent population debates about foreign migration. And the same discourse has always been central to the last decade of its creative industrial development, where the motif of sustainability is now even used to build theme parks that will add value add to cultural tourism. So my paper today is really intended as a kind of critical stocktake of the last 10 years of creative industrial reform in Singapore, and canvassing kind of literature. I hope to sort of map out an existing an emergent discourse on sustainability, and I want to extend that kind of discourse on sustainability from cultural sustainability into the concept of just sustainability, and I want to demonstrate the idea of just sustainability using my case study at the end, the kind of social enterprise of Friday. Friday is an online gay website. It's probably one of the largest and most successful new media businesses in Singapore as well. So some of my slides I'm just going to go through very quickly. My talk is 22 minutes. So Singapore released its Creative Industrial Blueprint in 2002 in the wake of the Asian financial crisis, and this particular blueprint defines the creative industries as those industries which have their origin in individual creativity, skill and talent, and which have a potential for job and wealth creation through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. And in 2002, it was estimated that this economy would make up 3.2% of the GDP, with a growth rate of 8%, employing 4.3% of the workforce. And in the last 10 years since its implementation, the creative economy has thrived, and it now commands an annual government budget of $365 million. Art activities, for example, have increased 20-fold. In 2012, Singapore, staged 33,884 arts events. So there's this big kind of uptake. The Singapore model, as we've heard this morning, follows the British model, the DCMS model, and it tries to carve out the economy into 15 industries around three kind of broad headings: arts and culture, design, and media. And elsewhere, I have criticized this kind of, sort of policy implementation as a catch-up thesis. Singapore, in a bid to kind of remake its economy, trying to catch up with the knowledge economies of the West. Andy Pratt has also, from the other side, kind of criticized the export of cultural policy models from the West. And the Singapore model can also be said to call an innovation model. So in the innovation model, the imperative is not so much to create economic wealth. The imperative is the focus on new ideas or technologies, such as industrial entrepreneurship operating on the consumer side of the economy. So in this strategy, in the kind of creative industrial blueprint, you have a kind of two-pronged strategy, a kind of city branding, kind of harnessing the cultural capital of Singapore's New Asia, and then the formation of a series of new kinds of spatial agglomerations around creative cluster. The Singapore terminology is called creative township. So in the last 10 years, we have a series of industrial and entrepreneurial sort of innovations, including the expansion of the arts and cultural infrastructure, the promotion of heritage tourism, and the development of the digital media industry. So the Lucasfilm Animation Studio, for example, is the first the company's first offshore studio outside Hollywood. But however, in April this year, Lucas Singapore closed its games development division, cutting about 150 jobs. So here we are, sort of again invoking the idea of the kind of precarious workforce in this particular sector. So a kind of stock take now, critical stock take, creative industrial studies in Singapore, about 40 or so publications at this stage around the kind of standard areas, if you like. But they have three kind of distinct features, and I want to sort of talk through them very quickly. They all try to map, the kind of creative industrial development model and try to analyze the impact of policy. And they also produce new kinds of case studies with new actors, so new sites, new business practices, and new practitioners. So, new products, new consumption, new workplace practices, and so on and so forth. But so for example, Lilly Kong's work, talks about those black and white British colonial bungalows at Wessex Estate, and says that this has, sort of emerged as a creative cluster for artists, designers, architects to come together to live, work, and play. Casey Ho's work looks at new startups along Dunlop Street, which is a couple of years ago when he was doing the research, it was still ungentrified, the ungentrified portion of Little India. And he said it's low rent there, central location, and it has enabled these new startups to actually thrive. But most significantly, I think the third feature is, what these kind of studies do is to engage what I'm calling an emergent discourse of sustainability. And there are two themes here, two kind of this kind of themes of sustainability. So innovation, right? The question asked then is this economy sustainable in the future? And, the state of political control. The question then asks is, can creativity and innovation thrive in an authoritarian nation state? The import of foreign talent. The question asked then is, can the creative economy maintain its momentum through the import of foreign talent? So the policy of importing foreign talent in Singapore was implemented in 2003. Now, 1 in 3 Singaporean is actually a recently arrived migrant. And in the creative sector, foreign talent or foreign migrants make up 50 to 55% of the workforce. Now, infrastructure, can Singapore keep building all these kinds of beautiful, high spectacle buildings? Charles Landry says no. Well, Singapore is better at building, kind of containers rather than, thinking through the software and the content. So what you have in this kind, this particular theme of economic sustainability, these kinds of discourses invoke a discourse of economic sustainability about the viability of this economy, their plans, programs, and policies. And it is really important when we talk about creative industrial strategy that it is really about creating new and sustainable value for the city-state. And this is a quote by political economist Linda Lowe and her team making a recommendation about the innovations of Singapore policy to the New Zealand Department of Economic Development. So the second focus then, is around the kind of a lot of studies on localization. And the focus here is not on economic sustainability. The focus here is on sustainable development. So I'm going to just run through this very quickly. But in these kinds of studies by Singapore scholars such as Terence Chong, Lilly Kong, and Victor Yue, they examine new media, urban regeneration, the arts and film festival, and they show how community engagement and participation is not only important to social capital and social ties, but it is necessary for Singapore to become a truly global city. And more recently, a kind of more explicit, a group of scholarship, most explicitly engage the idea of sustainability, right? Davisi Buntham, for example, looks at Haji Lane. Haji Lane is in Kampong Glam, and Buntham kind of suggests, uses the term sustainable urban urban regeneration development to say Haji Lane is small-scale urban regeneration. It's mundane, so people still live there. It's part of everyday life. Therefore, there is, a kind of high community cohesion and has led to, a lot of grassroots intervention. And this is Melissa Rees and her team, kind of looks at how do we consider and how do we assess whether arts development in Singapore is sustainable. And the team uses the methodology of cultural statistics and cultural indicators, pulling numbers from everywhere in order to, find numbers to kind of support. Yes, Singapore has a vibrant cultural scene. Therefore, we can see increase in well-being and quality of life for the citizen. Joan Henderson, on the other hand, kind of criticizes the government's tourism policy and says that this kind of excessive management of top-down, kind of policies is not sustainable because it has led to a contrived sense of place and identity. And more recently, Jodie Liu, in her research on, sort of with new media artists, she asked them, what would you consider sustainable culture? And then they reply in the quote on the slide, it's important to strike a balance between self-identity and a sense of rootedness, as well as to capture and respond to all the environmental issues that are at stake. So here in these kinds of explicit discourses on sustainability, we see an emergent, kind of connotation around sustainable development. So the kind of ideas here is around kind of sustainable development. And here it's really about individual development and ecological development coming together in order to show how environmental values are maintained in the ecosystem. And this is measured in two ways. Firstly, the individual as a subject and object of development. And secondly, through quality of life, cultural indicators. So that's kind of localization, right? And so you have then, in these studies, all these studies on localization are invoking two kinds of frameworks within, the kind of emerging field of cultural sustainability studies. So cultural sustainability, the first, kind of concept, or the first framework is on cultural capital. And this is from an Australian cultural economist, David Throsby. His kind of definition of cultural capital is very slightly different to Bourdieu's notion of embodied, objectified, or aestheticized kind of states of cultural competence, if you like. Throsby defines cultural capital as tangible, physical infrastructure, right? Buildings, locations, and so on and so forth. And he also talks about cultural capital as intangible, intellectual kind of capital, ideas, values that are passed on, from group to group. And when Throsby is actually talking about the sustainability of culture, he's really using this definition of cultural capital to address intergenerational equity. And intergenerational equity is really defined as the fairness in the distribution of welfare and resources between generations, right? So for Throsby, then, the way we think about natural capital and what we inherit from our forebears to pass on to the next generation, it is the same way that he's kind of talking, that he's using to say we also need to maintain and preserve the kinds of cultural capital that we have inherited from our forebears so we can pass it on to the next generation. So in this way, then, kind of cultural capital contributes to long-term sustainability. And in this way, sort of cultural sustainability is very much front and central to the issues of sustainability. So if you think about cultural capital in this way, then the kind of Singaporean studies that I've invoked earlier, they speak to this particular kind of discourse when they start to, in those localization work, that they start to talk about local expressions, local identity, and so on and so forth. It is really speaking to this particular paradigm of cultural sustainability. Now, the second kind of paradigm of cultural sustainability that is invoked in these Singaporean studies is the concept of cultural vitality. And cultural vitality then comes from an Australian cultural policy consultant, John Hawkes. And John Hawkes defines culture as the fourth pillar of sustainability, alongside the economic, social, and environmental triple bottom line, right? So for Hawkes then, culture he kind of defines culture in exactly the same way as culture is defined in the 2009 UNESCO report on cultural diversity. In fact, the UNESCO report cited the work of John Hawkes to refer to culture as not just ways of life, but also material, signifying, and symbolic system. So in this way of thinking about, sort of culture, then in this definition, for Hawkes, then cultural vitality is the cornerstone of arts and cultural development project. And these arts and cultural development projects nurture cultural vitality because they focus on well-being, they focus on diversity, on creativity, on innovation, and these are the products of everyday forms of community interaction and involvement. So cultural vitality is regarded as essential to a healthy and sustainable society because it contributes to social equity, environmental responsibility, and economic viability. So again, then if we return to those Singaporean studies that I've canvassed, right, the kind of scholarship that kind of talks about, Singapore has a vibrant art scene, and the arts development has enabled, increase in the quality of life for the community. There's a lot of community cohesion and so on and so forth. The kind of paradigm that's invoked here is around the kind of paradigm of cultural vitality. So what these two kind of paradigms really show is that when we think of cultural sustainability, it is essential to kind of take a comprehensive approach to sustainability, integrating not only the social, economic, environmental, and cultural dimensions, and looking at that, at its impact on human communities. And this kind of a comprehensive approach is really evident in Lilly Kong's work, a 2009 work where she uses, kind of three definitions of sustainability: environmental, cultural, and social, to compare two creative clusters in Singapore. So she looks at theatres by the bay, and she looks at Wessex Estate, those black and white British colonial bungalows I talked about earlier. And for the theatres by the bay, she says this is high spectacle, high profit, kind of an infrastructure that, kind of relies on import, kind of theatre is not conducive to, does not encourage local expression. And she says, however, Wessex Estate, it is very successful. It's organic, it's self-organizing. So this is where, sort of artists, photographers, architects, and so on and so forth actually live, work. They make work that they live there. And it's very much a kind of a touristic, kind of enclave as well. Beautiful cafes there and so on and so forth. So she says there's a strong sense of identity and belonging, right? So that's her kind of reading of Wessex Estate. I want to, compare a different reading of Wessex Estate by the VC Buntham, and just read the parts in red, right? So Buntham says Wessex Estate is a top-down creative policy implementation. People who live there actually belongs to the officially sanctioned creative class. Therefore, it's elitist, it's not inclusive, and they make their sort of artwork in isolation, and those artwork really cannot translate to the broader community. So if you go on a website and look at Wessex Estate, you want to, if you're an artist, you want to apply to live there, you really have to complete an application form to send it to the government, put in your CV with credentials, of international recognition of your artistic kind of excellence in order for you to be able to live there. So we have here two kinds of divergent discourses around the reading of Wessex Estate. For Kong, then, it's really about social inclusion within. These artists have a strong sense of identity. For Buntham, then, it's really about social equity without. How can we then, kind of translate, the artwork and make that impact on the broader community. So here we're trying to kind of see a shift here in these two readings, from the diversity of social inclusion to a kind of redistributive focus of social justice and equity. So kind of redistribute the resource from one to the next. So I want to then spend the rest of my time now to talk about this redistribution kind of focus, right? And I want to introduce, alongside these two paradigms of cultural sustainability frameworks, a new kind of paradigm called just sustainability paradigm by Julian Agerman, who is a professor of urban environmental policy. So Agerman coins this concept, just sustainability paradigm, JSP, to highlight how issues of environmental quality are also linked to issues of human inequality. Okay, so central to the JSP framework is really, a kind of vision and an objective around transformation, not just practices about reforming behavior, but it's really about transforming, the structure, and that means, taking issues of equity and justice, making it front and center of the vision. That is a kind of just sustainability paradigm. So Agerman comes up with this kind of paradigm by comparing two existing paradigms, right? The environmental discourse and the community development discourse. NEP, the environmental paradigm, is usually one that's associated with the global north. It's a green agenda. It's on biodiversity and ecological sustainability. The environmental justice paradigm, it kind of relates to the global south. It's a brown agenda focusing on poverty alleviation, promotion of health, infrastructure building, and so on and so forth. So the JSP is a third middle ground, he says. It's flexible and contingent, and it redefines sustainability by, sort of emphasizing the discourse of redistribution. And sustainability is defined in this way: the need to ensure a better quality of life in a just and equitable manner while living within the limits of the supporting ecosystems. And it emphasizes the 3 E's, if you like. 3 E's: environment. The environment is the environment where we live, work, and play. And in this environment, issues of race, class, and social justice must take front and center. And the economy, we also need to think about innovation and profit. And, alongside that, we also need to think about equity. So I want to come to my last case study on Friday. And Friday is a gay personal's website. It speaks to this 3 E's that Agerman's referred to. Environment, right? Friday operates outside of creative clusters. It's not one of those gay bohemia creative clusters in Chinatown. It also operates successfully in an environment where homosexuality is illegal. So, economy, right? It is a successful business innovation model based on the model of the social enterprise. Equity, right? It is a gay website, and it is a gay website about social empowerment. But what it does is that it also exposes the country's politics of social inclusion, but more significantly exposes the country's politics of sexual justice. So, just kind of very descriptive here. Friday as a social enterprise, just to give you a bit of a background, it emerged in 2000 along the sort of .com boom with the queer commodity boom. It was a beneficiary of the Singapore's kind of creative economy milieu, but it's never received a cent from the government. In the first couple of years, it staged, sort of Singapore's first public LGBT party, and also, those parties became so huge, it also became regional LGBT parties as well. And from 2005 onwards, been officially endorsed by the National Arts Council as an official promoter of the arts. And in 2010, so it runs HIV/AIDS, behavioral surveillance surveys every year. This survey is now the largest and the world's most multilingual. It returns about 14,000 surveys annually, and it's conducted in about 10 languages. And 2012, it's reached 500,000 members in paid subscription. So it's a for-profit business, and it's an offshore server. So I want to talk about it as a kind of social enterprise, right? So it has 5 broad activities: website, media company, gay-related marketing, internet producer of HIV programming, and community cultural development. So I want to talk about it as a social enterprise. You're all kind of pretty familiar with the concept, so I'm just going to talk through it very quickly. It's a hybrid of business and social kind of focus. Okay.
No more time.
And it is
because
a story.
Otherwise, we will have no question-answer session.
Okay. All right. So I will just conclude. just one last slide, my conclusion. I kind of canvassed the creative industry studies to show an emergent discourse of sustainability, both around economy and community engagement. And this kind of turned to social. It's kind of reflected in policy shifts in Singapore. In 2007, Singapore joined UNESCO, so it's kind of started to embrace the cultural development agenda. So now the creative industrial model also follows the Scandinavian model, focusing on cultural citizenship. So that also prompted Lilly Kong to say that's a kind of shift to cultural social policy. So in terms of, I kind of frame those emergent discourses of sustainability around cultural sustainability. And I introduced a kind of new kind of paradigm on just sustainability to kind of return us back to the focus on kind of the redistribution of resources, and haven't been able to quite get through the example of Friday as a social enterprise, but we can talk more about that in Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you.